Racist cop smashes black man's sunglasses on the beach. 7 minutes later learns who his wife is. The sound of shattering glass mingled with the crashing of ocean waves as Mollick Carter's prized sunglasses splintered into tiny fragments on the sunlit sand. In that split second, a moment charged with disbelief and anger, everything changed. Around him, a scattered hush fell over the crowded beach, as if the world itself had paused to register an injustice unfolding before its eyes. Ezra Carter, a dignified 42-year-old community leader and local business owner, had been enjoying one of those rare, precious days of leisure. His custom sunglasses and heirloom gift, symbolizing his resilience and self-respect, were more than a fashion statement. They were a part of his identity. And in one callous act, they were violently destroyed by a man entrusted with authority. This was no isolated moment of thoughtless vandalism. It was the climax of years of systemic prejudice, a brutal reminder that even on a day meant for freedom and enjoyment, a black man's dignity could be shattered by a racist impulse. In the minutes that followed, as shock rippled through the gathering crowd, the stage was set for a confrontation that would expose deep-seated biases and transform personal humiliation into a rallying cry for justice. The beach was a mosaic of life on that radiant Saturday afternoon. Golden sand stretched along the shoreline, fringed by turquoise waters that shimmered under a cloudless sky. Families picnicked under brightly colored umbrellas. Groups of teenagers laughed as they played volleyball, and older couples strolled leisurely, savoring the gentle sea breeze. Ezra Carter had arrived early that day with a resolve to embrace the simple joys of community and nature. Known in his neighborhood not only as a successful entrepreneur, but also as a mentor and organizer, he carried himself with quiet confidence. His deep, resonant laughter and easy smile had made him a beloved figure among the locals. Yet beneath his outward calm, Ezra Carter was no stranger to the sting of discrimination. Over the years, he had weathered countless microaggressions, from subtle sidelong glances to overt dismissals, and learned to shield his inner strength with dignity. That morning, Ezra Carter had donned his signature pair of sunglasses, sleek, classic, and imbued with personal history. They had been a gift from a revered mentor who once told him, "Your eyes see the truth. Let these guard them against a world that may try to dim your light." As Ezra Carter strolled along the water's edge, he felt a quiet assurance in his stride, a feeling that for a brief blissful moment the world was his to enjoy. But as the day wore on, murmurs among beachgoers hinted at a growing tension. Some recalled news reports of police abuses in nearby communities. Others exchanged wary glances at the uniformed figures patrolling the area. Though the beach was a place of leisure, the scars of systemic injustice were never far from sight. Without warning, the tranquility of the afternoon was shattered. As Ezra Carter made his way along the boardwalk, lost in thought and enjoying the warmth of the sun, a hulking figure in a crisp uniform strode into view. Officer Grant Dawson, a 46-year-old cop known for his rigid demeanor and haughty air, advanced with a deliberate predatory gait. His eyes, cold and judgmental, locked onto Ezra Carter as if sizing him up for some undisclosed offense. Before Ezra Carter could react, Dawson reached into his patrol bag, producing a heavy plastic bucket filled with water. In one swift, cruel motion, the officer swung the bucket high and let it fall. The water cascaded down upon Ezra Carter, not in a measured splash to cool a hot day, but as a targeted violent assault. The impact was shocking. Ezra Carter's sunglasses flew from his face, shattering on the sand in a burst of fragments. A collective gasp erupted from those nearby. For a moment, everything slowed. Mollick's shock mingled with a deep, searing humiliation. His eyes widened in disbelief, and his heart pounded as he struggled to comprehend what had just happened. In that instant, the pristine, joyful ambience of the beach was tainted by an act of blatant racial abuse. Dawson's face twisted into a sneer as he barked, "You need to learn your place." His words, laced with contempt, reverberated over the sound of the surf. The beachgoers' reactions were immediate. Some froze in stunned silence, while others fumbled for their phones to record the scene. Murmurs of "That's not right," and "How dare you" filled the air, each voice a small protest against the injustice unfolding before them. Ezra Carter stood rooted to the murmurs of "That's not right," and how dare you filled the air, each voice a small protest against the injustice unfolding before them. Ezra Carter stood rooted to the spot, a mixture of anger, sorrow, and quiet determination stirring within him. The shattered pieces of his sunglasses glittered on the sand, a symbol of not just a personal loss, but of a broader systemic assault on his dignity. The moment was raw and public, a stark reminder that racism could strike even in the most serene settings. In the immediate aftermath of the assault, the beach transformed from a scene of leisure to a stage for communal outrage. Ezra Carter's face, wet with both seawater and unshed tears, bore the marks of humiliation. Yet beneath that exterior an inner fire was kindling, a resolve to reclaim his dignity and challenge the forces of injustice head-on. Around him, a diverse group of beachgoers began to converge. A young activist, her eyes blazing with indignation, quickly took out her phone and started a live stream urging everyone to bear witness. An elderly man with decades of experience in civil rights struggles shook his head slowly, murmuring about how history was repeating itself. A group of friends huddled together, their whispered conversations punctuated by clenched fists and determined stares. Every face in the crowd reflected a shared pain, a recognition that this was not merely an isolated incident, but part of a much larger pattern of racial abuse. As the murmurs grew louder, a discreet text message buzzed among a cluster of onlookers. The message, short and urgent, 7 minutes, was passed hand to hand and over social media. It hinted at something significant on the horizon, a turning point that would upend the balance of power on the beach. Within that brief, ticking interval, anticipation rippled through the crowd. Whispers spread. Ezra Carter's wife, Naomi Carter, was on her way. For Ezra Carter, every second that passed was a reminder of the weight of the moment. His mind raced back to memories of past encounters with discrimination, of being sidelined in business meetings, of having his competence questioned in subtle yet painful ways. Now his personal history was colliding with a moment of public disgrace. Yet, as his internal narrative surged with memories and anger, so too did a burgeoning determination. He would not allow this act to define him. Every fragment of his broken sunglasses glinted in the sunlight, as if calling him to rise above the cruelty. Meanwhile, Officer Dawson, still standing with his bucket at his side, scanned the crowd. For a fleeting moment, his eyes revealed a spark of hesitation, a shadow of doubt that was quickly smothered by the weight of his own prejudices. Internally, he recalled a time, however distant, when he had once known kindness. But that memory was now buried under layers of bias and self-justification, and he continued to project authority with a practiced sneer. The tension on the beach was palpable. Conversations erupted in small clusters. "This is an outrage," one man said, his voice trembling with emotion. "We won't let this slide," declared another as he recorded the scene. Even the rhythmic crash of the waves seemed to underscore the heartbeat of a community that refused to accept injustice. Exactly 7 minutes after the devastating act, the heavy mood shifted as if by a sudden gust of wind. The main access gate to the beach swung open, and from it emerged Naomi Carter, dressed smartly in a tailored blazer and exuding an air of unyielding authority. Naomi's arrival was like a bolt of lightning in the midst of the storm. Her confident stride and calm, piercing gaze immediately commanded attention. The moment her eyes met Ezra Carter's, a silent conversation passed between them, a mixture of relief, resolve, and a shared understanding of the battles they had both fought. As Naomi made her way directly toward Ezra Carter, the murmur in the crowd rose to a crescendo. Every face turned, every phone raised, awaited her next move with bated breath. Without hesitating, Naomi approached Officer Dawson. "Officer Dawson," she said, her voice even yet laden with righteous fury, "explain your actions." Her tone was cool and measured, but every word carried the weight of a lifetime spent fighting for justice. Dawson, caught off guard by the unexpected confrontation, stuttered. "I was just doing my job," he managed, his voice wavering for a split second. But Naomi's eyes were unwavering, her gaze slicing through the feeble excuse. "There's no job that includes humiliating a man in public, no job that allows you to destroy a piece of his identity." Naomi retorted, "My husband's sunglasses were not merely an accessory. They symbolized his dignity and our struggle as a community." Her words struck the air like thunder, reverberating among the gathered beachgoers. At that critical moment, an unexpected twist deepened the tension even further. A soft voice emerged from a cluster of onlookers, a bystander, an older gentleman whose lined face spoke of decades of hardship. I remember Officer Dawson mentioning once that he grew up near the Carters. The man said quietly. He even knew one of M. Malek's cousins back then. The revelation, whispered but heard clearly by all, sent a ripple of disbelief through the crowd. The irony was painful. The man who now embodied cruelty and prejudice had once shared a community bond with Malek's family. Dawson's face contorted with a mixture of anger and a fleeting, conflicted hesitation. For one heart-stopping moment, it seemed as if he might acknowledge the connection, but his pride and ingrained bias quickly reasserted themselves. I don't need your pity or your history to justify my actions, he snapped, though his voice lacked its earlier force. Naomi's eyes narrowed, and she stepped even closer. Then you have no explanation, she said softly but firmly. You have no excuse for treating a human being like an object of ridicule. The intensity in her tone and the resolute silence that followed transformed the confrontation into a public spectacle, a showdown between raw, unyielding justice and the stubborn relics of systemic racism. The crowd erupted into supportive shouts and claps. A group of young activists began recording Naomi's every word, their voices rising in unison with chants of justice and respect. The beach, which had been a place of leisure mere minutes before, had now become a battleground for dignity and equality. For Ezra Carter, standing amid the tumult, a surge of mixed emotions swept over him. The shock of the earlier humiliation was still fresh, but the sight of his wife confronting injustice head-on ignited a deep, defiant pride within him. Even as his heart pounded with residual anger and hurt, he felt bolstered by the undeniable strength of their shared commitment. As the confrontation reached its peak, Naomi delivered one final, resounding command. Officer Dawson, you will submit to an independent investigation. Today, your actions have crossed a line that cannot be erased. Her voice, steady and clear, left no room for further argument. In that moment, the power dynamics on the beach shifted irrevocably. The crowd's unified demand for accountability and justice resonated through every whispered word and raised hand. What had begun as a solitary act of racist abuse was now the spark for a collective uprising, a turning point that would have ramifications far beyond this singular incident. In the immediate fallout of the confrontation, the beach scene transformed into a whirlwind of activity. Fellow officers, alerted by the escalating chaos, stepped in to contain the situation. Officer Dawson, his earlier arrogance, now replaced by a growing sense of isolation and shame, was gently but firmly escorted away by his colleagues. His retreat was met with a mixture of boos and sympathetic looks from some onlookers, though the prevailing sentiment was one of righteous indignation. Back on the sand, Naomi moved to Ezra Carter's side, her arm reaching out to steady him as he tried to gather his scattered emotions. I'm here, she whispered, her voice both tender and resolute. Mollick nodded, still in a state of shock, but beginning to feel the stirring of determination. Every shard of his broken sunglasses on the sand now served as a tangible symbol of the injustice and the potential for change. Throughout the beach, the impact of the incident rippled outward. Smartphones captured every moment. Social media posts began flooding with hashtags demanding justice, and local news vans arrived to document what was quickly becoming a landmark event in the community's ongoing battle against systemic racism. A young activist still live streaming from the scene, interviewed several witnesses. I've seen this before, one elderly woman said, her voice trembling with emotion, but never with such blatant cruelty in broad daylight. Another bystander, a college student, declared, we're not going to let this slide. Today, we show that our dignity is non-negotiable. Their voices filled with hope and a call for collective action added fuel to the growing momentum for reform. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner away from the crowd, Officer Dawson sat in a temporary holding area set up by his department. His mind replayed the events of the day in a torturous loop. His actions, the sound of shattering glass, Naomi's piercing gaze, and that whispered recollection of a shared past with the Carter family. For fleeting seconds, A spark of regret and uncertainty flickered in his eyes. But as he tried to muster any semblance of remorse, it was quickly drowned by a surge of defensive pride. In that conflicted inner moment, he could not fully escape the hardened shell of prejudice that had defined him for so long. Back on the beach, as the afternoon gave way to an amber twilight, Naomi and Ezra Carter addressed the assembled crowd. Standing atop a small makeshift platform near the lifeguard tower, Naomi's voice resonated clearly. "This incident is not just about one act of racism," she declared. "It is about a system that has for far too long devalued our humanity. Today we stand together to demand accountability, to demand respect, and to remind every one of us that dignity is our right." The crowd responded with a swell of cheers and clapping, a unified outpouring of hope and defiance. Ezra Carter, drawing on the strength that had carried him through years of adversity, added in a measured tone, "Our journey is not over. This moment, painful as it is, will be the catalyst for change. We will reclaim our identity, and we will ensure that no one is ever made to feel less than they are again." His words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply with everyone present. In the days and weeks that followed, the incident at the beach ignited a wave of public outcry that extended far beyond the local community. Local authorities, pressured by the undeniable evidence and impassioned protests, announced an independent investigation into Officer Grant Dawson's conduct. Community leaders, activists, and even previously skeptical local politicians joined forces, demanding not only accountability for this act, but sweeping reforms to address the systemic roots of racism within law enforcement. Naomi, leveraging her legal expertise and personal connection to the events, became a prominent spokesperson for change. In a series of televised interviews and public forums, she spoke eloquently about the need for transparency, bias training, and stronger oversight within the police department. "We cannot allow personal prejudice to masquerade as the enforcement of law," she declared in one address. "Every citizen, especially those who have long suffered under systemic injustice, deserves to be treated with respect and dignity." Ezra Carter, though still grappling with the physical and emotional remnants of that humiliating day, began to channel his pain into purpose. He organized community meetings at local venues and worked with neighborhood groups to establish a new initiative aimed at empowering marginalized voices. A symbolic moment came when the community presented him with a new pair of sunglasses, crafted by a local artisan and inscribed with the words, "Dignity, Resilience, Unity." For Ezra Carter, the gift was not merely a replacement for what was lost, but a reaffirmation that his identity was intact, strengthened by collective solidarity. Across the city, the reverberations of the beach incident spurred debates in town halls and even within police precincts. Several officers, inspired by the courage of Naomi and Ezra Carter, began advocating for internal reforms. Though change within entrenched systems was slow, the seeds had been planted. A few officers quietly took it upon themselves to undergo additional training in de-escalation and community policing, hoping to bridge the chasm between authority and the people they served. Social media campaigns, tagged with hashtags like "Dignity on the Beach" and "Justice for All," garnered national attention, transforming the incident into a symbol of resistance against systemic racism. Articles and opinion pieces in local newspapers and national outlets highlighted not only the shameful act, but also the hopeful response of a community unwilling to accept injustice. Through these channels, the message was clear. Every act of cruelty, no matter how isolated it might seem, would be met with a collective call for change. Several months later, the once traumatized beach had transformed into a symbol of resilience and community strength. A large mural now adorned a prominent section of the boardwalk, depicting a powerful image of Ezra Carter wearing his new sunglasses, surrounded by diverse figures united in hope and defiance. The mural served as a living reminder that while the scars of racism could be deep, they were also the starting point for healing and progress. At a community celebration held on a cool, clear evening, Ezra Carter and Naomi stood before a crowd of neighbors, activists, and even a few reflective police officers. The air was filled with music, laughter, and the steady hum of renewed hope. In a brief, heartfelt speech, Ezra Carter addressed the gathering. "We have faced humiliation and injustice, but together we have shown that our dignity is unbreakable. Every drop of pain has watered the seeds of change. Today we celebrate not just a new day at the beach, but a new dawn in our fight for justice. Naomi, her eyes glistening with both tears and pride, added, "Let this moment remind us that our strength lies in unity. Our voices, when joined together, can dismantle systems built on hatred and fear. We must continue to stand up, speak out, and never allow injustice to go unchallenged." In a quiet moment later that night, as the crowd dispersed and the soft sound of waves lulled the shore, even Officer Dawson was seen, alone, reflective, and perhaps, for the first time, beginning to question the rigid prejudices that had defined him for so long. Though his journey toward change would be long and fraught with internal conflict, the seed of doubt had been sown, hinting at the possibility that even those steeped in old ways might one day embrace a new understanding. The legacy of that fateful day on the beach was thus etched into the hearts of the community. It was a story of pain transformed into progress, a reminder that while systemic racism might wound, the collective power of resilience, accountability, and unwavering dignity could indeed forge a path toward a more just and equitable future. As the final notes of the celebration faded into the gentle murmur of the ocean, the mural on the boardwalk shimmered under the moonlight, a silent testament to a day when injustice was met head-on by courage, and when every act of defiance became a building block for a better tomorrow.